You mentioned, Aidan, that you like touchdown props. So if we're talking touchdown props for week 4, where are you seeing value there?
Yeah, so you had just said that they didn't really have as many weapons last year, and I think this year the Cardinals got a pretty good wide receiver. I believe his name is Marvin
Greg
Harrison
Dortch,
Jr.
right? Oh,
I am a
geez. Oh,
Dortch guy. I
sorry.
am a
Yeah,
Dortch guy.
geez.
I have to say that is a short king, Marvin Harrison Jr. So this morning, I believe it is sitting at plus 105
hmm
on FanDuel. I on I've seen this at other books like as low as like minus 140, minus
Wow.
145. And immediately when you see that kind of variance, you're like, okay, I want to attack this from
Yeah.
one angle or another. Either like one of the models has to be off here. And for me, I believe it is ours. So we've established that this game is expected to be back and forth and feature a lot of points. And in the same vein that the Washington has struggled to contain the pass, opposing wide receivers have fared really well against them. They've allowed the fourth highest target rate and the third most yards per route run to the position, and they've been scored on 9 times in 3 games. I think the next closest team has only allowed 6 wide receiver touchdowns. Like last week, we saw Jamar Chase get 2. In week 1, Mike Evans got 2 and Chris Godwin got in. In week 2, Malik Neighbors went nuclear and had a touchdown. But looking at Marv specifically, like after kind of a dud of a week 1, everyone was freaking out. He's slow. Like he's not running routes hard. He's fine. He's Marvin
Yeah.
Harrison Jr. Like the last 2 weeks, he's had 9 catches, almost 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He leads the Cardinals with a 35% target share over that span. And he's gotten over 50% of their air yards over the last 2 games, which is really important for big plays, especially against kind of a spotty Commanders defense. I think most importantly, too, he's gotten 3 quarters of their red zone targets over the last 2 games. And so that's something I'm really looking for. Like I said, that can definitely vary based on how a game is going. But the fact that Kyler is already comfortable targeting him in the red zone and he's already getting separation and someone that the offense is comfortable targeting when they get in close, that is where I really want to attack this market. And especially when you look at who else Kyler's going to have to throw this week. You mentioned
Right.
Greg Dortch, not as much of a red zone threat, but Trey McBride is in concussion protocol. And based on how we've seen that go the last couple of seasons, I would be pretty surprised if he gets cleared in time for Sunday's game, which would
Mhm.
only open up more looks for Marvin Harrison, especially when they get down to the goal line. I just don't think we should be getting plus money with Marv based on how well he's played and based on how bad Washington has been. And so, with it so much lower on other books, this is something I'm definitely trying to lock in as soon as possible on FanDuel because I would not be surprised at all if it starts to drop as we get closer to Sunday.
And especially if McBride is ruled out, we could see some movement there as well. Now, the other thing too is when Harrison had that huge game in week 2, he had the 2 long touchdowns. He also had a pair of empty red zone targets. You mentioned the hefty red zone share. Since then, 2 of those were empty targets. He could have actually had more than 2 touchdowns in that game had Kyler connected with him. So I think that Harrison does make a lot of sense. That's plus 105 at FanDuel Sportsbook right now. Any other touchdown bets stand out to you, Aiden?
Yeah, so I got to go to my guy George Pickens
Oh,
up against the
baby.
Indianapolis Colts. Oh, the poor Colts. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those teams that I'm going to want to pick on for the
Potentially.
remainder of the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
So Pickens is, I believe, at plus 220. He was last night when I was looking,
He is still there. Yep.
plus 220 to score. This is probably the prop I'm most excited to play, just given
Okay.
the odds and the matchup this week. So Pickens has not scored yet this season, and his overall numbers are like actually pretty mild. But they've played 3 pretty good secondaries, and he's had to face 2 really good corners in AJ Terrell and Pat Surtain. And he's still generating a ton of separation. He still looks just eye test wise really, really good. And now, granted, the Steelers are, I believe, negative 10% pass rate over expectation. And like, that's what you're going to get when Arthur Smith is your offensive coordinator and Justin Fields is your quarterback. But Pickens still leads the team with a 25% target share, and he's third in the entire league with a 50% air yard share. So when they do air it out, they're looking for Pickens and they're looking for him downfield where he can generate explosive plays and get yards after the catch. And like I said, like this is not out of the ordinary for an offense, Arthur Smith offense to lean run heavy. And he has been one of the more frustrating for fantasy and for betting of not prioritizing his star players. But George Pickens is far and away the best wide receiver on the Steelers. And they're going into this matchup that is indoors against the Colts, who are a bottom 10 pass defense. They've given up the ninth most yards per route run and the third highest average depth of target to wide receivers. So they're giving up these chunk plays, these plays down the field, and they just don't have the outside corners. I do not believe to guard someone like Pickens. And so because of that big playability and because of how much success I think this Steelers offense that has looked pretty good, if not a little slower early on, I think they're going to have success moving the ball against the Colts defense. And I don't think George Pickens is going to have lack opportunities to score and bust open plays. And considering he hasn't scored this year, despite seeing fair amount of red zone targets and plenty of action down the field, I think this is a spot where we start to see a George Pickens breakout. And I think you could attack his props from like either receptions or yards would be
Yeah.
my preferred way to do this.
Yeah.
But for me, getting that plus 220 on him to score a touchdown is just, I can't pass that up.
Yeah, I mentioned I like volatile wide receivers. This is the guy you got to have in mind when you think of volatile wide receivers. George Pickens plus 220 to score at FanDuel Sportsbook. And you mentioned the Colts letting up a lot of chunk gains. That's sticky because that's the kind of defense they play. It's not a 2024 defense. You see a lot of too high safeties. It's Colts, man. And George Pickens has 63% of Justin Fields' downfield targets this year. So they do go deep. They're indoors, by the way. It's going to go to George Pickens. So I do think that's pretty fun. Checking out the alternate markets on Pickens as far as receiving yardage, because I think that is, as you mentioned, another intriguing way to attack George Pickens. For him to get 70 plus yards, plus 175, he is plus 470 for 100 plus yards as always. Take that, for what it is, because the odds he gets there are low and the odds are long for a reason, but he would be the kind of archetype of player you'd want to target with alt markets for receiving yards because he can get his yardage in chunks, as Aidan mentioned. But the touchdown prop plus 220 is where Aidan is turning for this week.